In the summer of 1999, three hunters crossing a glacier in the mountains of British Columbia noticed something strange: wooden fragments sticking out of the ice. When they got closer, they realized it wasn't just wood, it was a human body. This was no recent tragedy. It was the remains of a young man who had died before the modern world, excellently preserved in ice. His discovery would lead to one of the most remarkable archaeological investigations since the find of Otzi the Iceman nearly a decade earlier. This is the story of Kawade Dunzinchi, a young man whose bodies, tools, and even food in his stomach have taught us invaluable lessons about the lives of indigenous hunter-gatherers in North America. Our story begins on July 22, 1999, in the rugged wilderness along the border of British Columbia and the Yukon. Three hunters were after one of the most difficult animals to hunt on the continent, the bighorn sheep. Sheep hunting in the Yukon isn't for the faint of heart. It's one of the most punishing hunts in the world. Long days above the tree line, thin mountain air, unpredictable weather, and terrain that tests every ounce of endurance. But on that day, they were about to come upon something far more memorable than a sheep mount. While hiking across a melting glacier, they noticed something strange: wooden fragments poking through the ice. This was weird as they were far above the tree line, so they stopped and took a closer look. The wood was carved, not by nature but by human hands. And then they saw it, a human body emerging from the retreating ice. The left arm still had skin, hair still clung from the scalp. The remains were frozen in time immemorial. They were clearly old, and it did not appear to be a recent murder victim or a hunt gone wrong. The hunters had likely heard of the discovery of Otzi the Iceman, a 5,000-year-old Copper-Age corpse found in northern Italy. Otzi was buried with a fascinating toolkit including a copper axe, stone arrows, a stone knife, and even medicinal plants. From his soft tissue, we were able to learn innumerable things about his life, diet, and ultimate cause of death: a fatal arrow wound in his shoulder. This discovery shook the world, and the hunters may have realized the significance of what lay before them. So they gathered some small things and brought them to Yukon archaeologists. The archaeologists examined the remains, but before going public, they did something rare and right. They contacted the Champagne and Aishihik First Nations, whose traditional territory includes this land. Because this wasn't just a scientific find, this was an ancestor. And it was the First Nations who gave him his name, Kawade Dunzinchi, meaning long ago person found. A team of archaeologists promptly made it to the site, and what they found was incredible. A young man, only around 18 or 19 years old, was found remarkably preserved. Much of his corpse remained, though parts had been torn away by the glacier he found himself in. But the preservation was astounding, and researchers recovered remarkable soft tissue and personal objects. These objects have helped paint a vivid picture of his world. He wore a robe made of 95 ground squirrel pelts, sewn together with sinew. This piece has fascinated me for years, and I really wish I could recreate it, but I don't really want to go kill 100 squirrels just for a coat. Another remarkable clothing item that he had was a woven spruce root hat. It was made with incredible skill and is excellently preserved. Alongside him was found a beaver fur pouch, and it was filled with lichen, moss, and other medicinal plants. Several wooden sticks were also found. Some may have been used for setting snares for small game or even carrying salmon. One consists of a painted staff, its use and meaning mysterious. But the last wooden objects were unmistakable. A longer dart and a wooden lever were undoubtedly used as a spear thrower or atlach. And a lot of people don't know this, but it's not an atlatl or atl-atl. It's a Nahuatl word, and it's pronounced atlach. I can imagine the firestorm I just started in the comments. Anyways, this weapon was once used across the world to hunt game big and small. It's pretty amazing that it was used from the Arctic all the way down into Australia. Also found with him was an interesting copper bead with cordage in it. This copper appears to have come from natural float copper, which can be worked simply by cold hammering. There is a long tradition of using this copper for tools and ornaments in this region. And copper just has this weight to it and natural shine that may have held significance to him. The last tool we found alongside him was a small iron-bladed knife in a gopher skin sheath. This tool is fascinating for many reasons. Firstly, it proved that his remains couldn't have been too old, as iron wasn't smelted anywhere until around 3,200 years ago, and it was not smelted in the Americas prior to contact. It is true that meteoric iron was occasionally used by the indigenous of the Arctic, but these tools are rare and easily identifiable. The iron from his knife likely came from a shipwreck, or a more recent trade coming from Siberia. Carbon dating of the artifacts and human remains found a date of between 300 to 550 years ago. This is nowhere near as old as Otzi, but this time period is still important. This man would have lived slightly before or after the voyages of Columbus and the following Europeans that would have radical consequences for world history. It is unlikely that the Canadian Iceman would have come into contact with any Eurasian, but his iron-bladed knife hints at a world that was already shifting. Whether he realized it or not, Kawade Dansenshi was living at the edge of a turning point in world history, a time when ancient foraging traditions were beginning to intersect with the expanding reach of global trade, and yet his tools were made from the land. His robe, his snares, his entourage all spoke of a deep ancestral knowledge of the wilderness. But it's not just the tools that tell his story. His stomach contained evidence that may help to explain how he ended up frozen on the top of a glacier. According to DNA and isotope analysis, he had spent most of his life on the Pacific coast, enjoying salmon and shellfish. It also found that in the final moments prior to his death, he had spent more time inland. His hair samples, which contain a record of your recent diet, showed a meat-heavy inland diet. But interestingly, he must have returned to the coast at some point to eat seafood, beach asparagus, and other coastal greens. Based on pollen and digestive evidence, he had traveled at least 100 kilometers inland in just 3 days. Why he was making such a long journey to the rugged interior, we may never know. Was there a girl waiting for him, or a distantly related family member that he wanted to visit? It's questions like these that make history feel so human. His journey would unfortunately be cut short, as well as his life. We don't know exactly how he died, but hypothermia is the most likely cause. Alone on the glacier, he was exposed to freezing winds, snow, and cold that would have drained his strength. His hands and feet would have gone numb, his body shutting down as he struggled to keep moving. Eventually, he collapsed and was buried by snow, preserved by the ice that killed him. His death happened during the Little Ice Age, a period of cooling that brought hardship around the world. In Europe, crops failed and famine spread. In North America, brutal winters made survival difficult for both indigenous peoples and colonists. Maybe he was crossing the mountains to bring food to family inland, or maybe he left the coast because he was already struggling to survive. We can only guess. But the glacier claimed him and kept his body hidden for centuries. The last chapter of the story of Kawade Dansenshi has to do with his DNA. Was he related to the modern indigenous people of the area? Was anyone still alive who shared his blood? Researchers extracted mitochondrial DNA from his tissue. In 2000, they invited 241 volunteers from surrounding First Nations to participate in a study. The result? 17 individuals were identified as his direct maternal relatives. Among them were Pearl Callahan and Sheila Clark, 2 sisters from the Yukon. The moment they learned they were related to him was powerful. "It was very moving, overwhelming," Callahan said. Clark added, "We all want to know our history, and now we know we are connected this way to somebody." Many of these relatives belong to the Wolf clan, supporting the idea that Kawade Dansenshi himself had likely been a member of that clan. A detail rooted in maternal tradition, where children inherit clan affiliation from their mother. But this wasn't just a scientific revelation, it was a cultural reawakening. Chief Diane Strand, who led the DNA initiative, said it best. "We want to use the science to confirm our cultural knowledge, our beliefs, and our family relationships." The impact of Kawade Dansenshi's discovery rippled far beyond genetics. His 95 pelt robe made from Arctic ground squirrels sparked a resurgence of interest in traditional garment making. Elders in the community began teaching the intricate process from trapping and skinning the animals to tanning, sewing, and preserving the knowledge. I'm wanting to make one again after learning all of that. I will be in Montana in a week, so maybe I'll get myself a ground squirrel. Other ancestral skills like weaving spruce root hats were also taught again. Children learned the old methods, and elders were telling their stories. As Lawrence Joe, Heritage Director with the First Nations, explained, this is about more than one individual. It's about a culture reconnecting with itself. From the beginning, the discovery of Kawade Dansenshi was handled with unprecedented care and respect. Rather than taking ownership of the find, The archaeologists and Canadian officials chose to co-manage the process with the First Nations. Every decision from excavation to analysis was made in partnership. This cooperative model became a global example of how Indigenous rights and scientific curiosity can coexist. As anthropologist Grant Keddy wrote, "This was not a case of the past being discovered. It was a case of the past being remembered." The entire approach stood in contrast to centuries of Indigenous remains being studied without consent. Here, consent was central, and when the time came for final decisions, the community had the last word. After years of study, the First Nations decided to cremate the remains of Kawade Dunsinchi. His ashes were scattered over the same glacier where he was found. Kawade Dunsinchi is often compared to Otzi the Iceman, but there's a key difference. Otzi was studied and displayed in a museum. I actually got to see it, it was awesome. But Kawade Dunsinchi was studied, yes, but he was also ultimately given back to the people. Where Otzi was isolated from living descendants, Kawade Dunsinchi had relatives who could still speak his language, who could feel his blood in his veins, and who saw him not as an artifact but as an ancestor. His story is a reminder that the past isn't dead. It is made up of people just like you and me, and one day, we will all be a part of the past as well. If stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to subscribe. There are countless more hidden chapters in archaeology waiting to be uncovered. And smashing that like button would really help these videos reach more people. Thanks for watching, I'll see you in the next one. Arrivederci.